wrestler will typically change gimmick because their current one isn't working, or they've gone a bit stale and need freshening up. Gimmick changes are a fairly regular occurrence in every promotion, including in the dearly departed WCW, which was home to some of the most outlandish characters in wrestling history. Sometimes these transitions were hugely successful, while on other occasions, gimmick changes were so ill-advised and flopped so hard that there was no coming back from them, even when the gimmick that they were changing from was hardly a money-drawing masterpiece in the first place. I'm Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 worst WCW gimmick changes. Join us. Number 10, Alex Wright to BERLYN. Young Alex Wright was snapped up by WCW when the country toured through his native Germany in 1994, the then 19-year-old not long after debuting as a clean-cut babyface nicknamed Das Wunderkind. Inspired by his love of techno, the high-flying technician, who was trained by his father, the British wrestler Steve Wright, became a staple of WCW's burgeoning cruiserweight division, bagging not just the cruiserweight title, but also the world television title too. A subsequent tag team with Disco Inferno, the Dancing Fools, went nowhere, and soon Alex began to flounder. He disappeared at the beginning of 1999 and re-emerged months later via a series of vignettes as BERLYN, the name a play on his country's capital city. BERLYN was much darker than Das Wunderkind, scrapping the colourful trunks and blonde hair for black everything, ditching techno in favour of industrial music, and adding backup in the form of the Wall. BERLYN, the Wall, get it? As well as only agreeing to speak through his interpreter. Unfortunately, someone in WCW noted a comparison between Wright's new gimmick and the perpetrators of the Columbine High School massacre, leading to its hasty end, though Alex himself has since claimed that BERLYN was supposed to be a vampire of some sort. Number 9, the Blacktop Bully to Mr. Hole-in-One. Barry Darsow, who had famously wrestled as Demolition Smash and less famously Repo Man in WWE, joined WCW in 1994, transforming into evil pro wrestling trucker the Blacktop Bully. Barry wasn't around for too long and was fired, along with Dustin Rhodes, in acrimonious circumstances after both men bladed in their balmy King of the Road match at Uncensored 95. So he took his medicine and disappeared for a couple of years before coming back, though not as the Blacktop Bully, but as, well, Barry Darsow. Thrilling stuff. Shockingly, Darsow failed to stand out as his plain old self and came up with a new wacky character, Mr. Hole-in-One. It's exactly what it sounds like, a pro wrestling golfer and supposed four-time PGA champion who would challenge his opponents to make a putt before their matches and then invariably deck them with a 5-iron. Eat your heart out, Kerwin White. Unsurprisingly, this was all relegated to the little-watched WCW Saturday Night, and Barry dropped it before too long, though he briefly resumed the character later as part of an amnesia angle. Wait a second, Barry Darsow amnesia angle? Thankfully, I have no recollection of that. Number 8, the West Hollywood Blondes to Standards and Practices. One of the major frustrations for those working in latter-era WCW was the perceived meddling of Turner Broadcasting's Standards and Practices department. As WWE were pulling way ahead in the Monday Night War, thanks in large part to the risque ratings-grabbing Attitude-era content that they were able to spunk out, WCW were, according to some, creatively handcuffed and unable to push the envelope, making it hard to compete on the smut fronts. So they did what WWE would soon do themselves with the right to censor, and created an outlet for on-air grievance airing. Lenny and Lodi, formerly known as the West Hollywood Blondes, became Standards and Practices, a censorious duo who opposed adult themes and were designed to mock the more conservative views of those who had challenged problematic WCW characters, angles, and storylines. Lenny and Lodi had themselves previously been the target of protests, with the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation successfully lobbying for their removal from TV. Standards and Practices, flanked by Stacey Miss Hancock Keebler, was an inside joke that didn't really land with the masses and was basically over, and I don't mean that in the wrestling sense, before it really got started. Number 7, Booker T to G.I. Bro. The Misfits in Action stable was bad news for many who found themselves in its ranks, including Hugh Morris, who was rechristened Hugh G. Rection. Sorry, didn't catch that, did ya? I said Hugh G. Rection. Huge you get it. Embarrassing as it was for Bill DeMott, it was potentially a whole lot worse for Booker T, who became MIA in the spring of 2000. Considering the former Harlem Heat man was being pegged as a potential world heavyweight champion and would in fact bag the gold about 6 weeks later, the decision to put him in camo and give him the moniker G.I. Bro after he lost the rights to his name in a storyline was a puzzling one. Turns out Booker had worked the gimmick long before making it to the big time, and it was actually his own idea to do it on WCW television as a way of paying tribute to his teacher, former journeyman pro wrestler Scott Casey. It really stalled his momentum, however, and after a handful of matches in the guise, G.I. Bro was given a dishonorable discharge. Number 6, Brian Pillman to the Yellow Dog. One of Brian Pillman's first big rivalries in WCW was with Barry Windham, culminating in a loser leaves WCW tag match where Flying Brian teamed up with Eli Gonte against Big Baz and Arn Anderson. As the one who was pinned, Pillman had to say his goodbyes, but he would soon reappear as the masked Yellow Dog, billed as coming from the Kennel Club and being accompanied to the ring by, you guessed it, an actual yellow dog. Like the Dusty Rhodes Midnight Rider angle from a few years before, the gag was that it was plainly obvious who the Yellow Dog was due to Pillman's distinctively raspy voice. Barry Windham himself had been the original Yellow Dog during a similar angle with Ron Bass. Sometimes the dog would put his mask on the line in bounty matches, while on other occasions Pillman's former partner Tom Z-Man Zenk would go under the hood with Brian in his corner so he could be all like, "See, it couldn't have been me." It was rather harmless, but ultimately quite naff and a waste of Pillman's considerable talent. A kayfabe letter writing campaign eventually got Flyin' Brian reinstated, and the Yellow Dog was Old Yellard. Number 5, Prince Iaukea to the artist formerly known as Prince Iaukea. Professional wrestling isn't the best when it comes to being topical or capitalizing on things that are happening within the broader popular culture as they're happening, preferring instead to get their references in when they're nice and dated. Case in point, WCW's decision to rebrand Prince Iaukea as the artist formerly known as Prince Iaukea in late 1999, some 6.5 goddamn years after pop singing sensation Prince had changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol, long story, and became known as the artist formerly known as Prince. He may have had puffy shirts, purple pants, and a new valet named Paisley after Prince's famed Paisley Park home and recording studio, but the artist formerly known as Prince Iaukea sadly didn't possess 1 ounce of the charisma that the man behind hits like Let's Go Crazy and Little Red Corvette did. The artist formerly known as Prince Iaukea soon shortened his name to the more commentator-friendly The Artist and was a fixture of the cruiserweight title scene, winning the belt twice in the first half of 2000. Prince Iaukea was never a world beater, but this repackaging smacked of desperation, and it was hardly a major surprise when The Artist was released. Number 4, The Boss to the Guardian Angel. There was a period in the early to mid-90s where WCW would sign a former WWE star and debut them with basically the same gimmick they used while under Vince McMahon's employ, only with a slight variation in name. Earthquake became Avalanche, Nails became The Prisoner, and the Big Boss Man became The Boss. WWE's legal department invariably had a problem with all of these because, you know, intellectual property laws and all that, necessitating changes on the WCW end. Ray Traylor had to ditch the prison guard thing and became the Guardian Angel instead. No, he wasn't a spirit sent to watch over and protect World Championship Wrestling, but a member of the namesake volunteer organization that originated in New York City as a means to prevent crime without the use of armed force. His work as the Guardian Angel wasn't bad or anything, but the gimmick didn't really suit him. Despite that, it lasted for about a year before he reverted to his old Big Bubba Rogers persona. Credit to Trailer Mind, who genuinely underwent real training and became a fully fledged Guardian Angel in his own right. Number 3, Avalanche to the Shark. Ray Traylor was one of the many former favored Hogan opponents and real-life friends who came to WCW after the Hulkster put pen to paper with the promotion. Another member of that crew was John Tenter, who had previously wrestled for WWE as Earthquake. He couldn't use that name or gimmick though, so WCW put their collective brain together and thought, what's scarier than an earthquake? Why, an avalanche, of course. Of course. Naturally, Avalanche looked, acted, and wrestled pretty much exactly like Earthquake, just with a dumber name. Hey, whatever works, right? Once again, WWE's legal team threatened action due to the obvious similarity, so Tenta and WCW had to come up with something new. And new meant donning longer tights, putting on a bandana, doing his makeup, slapping in some false teeth, and calling himself the Shark, a member of the evil Dungeon of Doom. Unlike an actual Great White, this new creation was toothless and duly sank, which sucked for the man behind it, as he had one of his tattoos changed from a tiger to a shark, believing it could be a successful long-term gimmick. Number 2. Luchador Rey Mysterio to Filthy Animal. Rey Mysterio defied all of his critics, including plenty in the locker room, by getting over while taking WCW by storm with his revolutionary lucha style, despite his small stature. Mysterio had successfully managed to avoid losing his mask, which was a big part of his appeal and something that WCW never truly capitalized on, but eventually relented and took it off after losing to the Outsiders at Super Brawl 1999 in a tag team hair versus mask match. Rey had a short but solid run after that as the Giant Killer, getting victories over much bigger opponents like Nash, Scott Norton, and Bam Bam Bigelow, before heading back to the cruiserweight scene and then joining up with Conan, Eddie Guerrero, Billy Kidman, and Tori Wilson as the Filthy Animals. It was not a banner era in Mysterio's illustrious career, as he looked plain ridiculous in those overalls and stuck on devil horns, while the material for the group's promos, angles, and storylines was typically juvenile. Since WWE wisely decided to remask the King of Mystery in 2002, the unmasked period in Rey's career is rarely, if ever, referenced. Even if he was to lose the mask once again, something tells me WWE still wouldn't be quick to revisit it. Number 1, Mike Awesome to the Fat Chick Thriller and that 70s guy. ECW World Champion Mike Awesome decided to leave Paul Heyman's promotion while still in the middle of his reign to try his luck with WCW. Things started out promisingly for Awesome, a strikingly agile big man with a powerful moveset, as he was booked to look dominant and scored some big wins, including against the seemingly untouchable Hulk Hogan. However, it wasn't too long after the Hulkster left following the controversial Bash at the Beach 2000 incident that Mike went from career killer to almost having his own career killed. Repackaged first as the Fat Chick Thriller, Awesome developed an infatuation with heavy-set women and became a bit of a creepy feeder. Not that there's anything wrong with that, of course, besides the creepy feeder part, but it was all played for laughs and supposedly penned by head writer Vince Russo to embarrass and punish Awesome for being the IRL cousin of Hulk's nephew Horace. His subsequent spell as the ultra-cheesy That 70s guy was falling upwards by default, but it was still a far cry from the impressive monster that he had been in ECW in Japan just a year or two before.